I bought my dad a brand new truck for his 60th birthday. At dinner, he raised his glass and said, "To my idiot daughter, trying to buy love with money." Everyone laughed. I just stood up, smiled, and left without a word. The next morning, his driveway was empty. And my phone exploded with 30 missed calls. My name is Sherry Wallace, 35 years old and a marketing director in Chicago. I always thought that success would finally win my father's approval. After 20 years of trying, I decided to go all in. I spent nearly $50,000 on a brand new truck for his 60th birthday. At the celebratory dinner, surrounded by family, Dad raised his glass for a toast. What he said next shattered our relationship forever. What followed was a night of painful revelations and a morning of consequences no one saw coming. I grew up in a modest two-story house in the suburbs of Detroit. On paper, we were the picture-perfect middle-class American family. My father worked as a mechanical engineer at one of the automotive plants, providing us with a comfortable life. But beneath that normal exterior, our home lacked something essential: warmth. Dad was always a stern man, tall with perpetually furrowed brows that made him look angry even when he wasn't. His face rarely softened with a smile, especially after my mother passed away. I was 12 when cancer took her from us, leaving just me and my father in that too-quiet house. Mom had been the buffer between his cold perfectionism and my desperate need for approval. Without her, the temperature of our relationship dropped to freezing. Dad threw himself into work, often coming home well after I'd gone to bed. When he was home, conversation was limited to practical matters: grades, chores, schedules, never feelings, never dreams. I still remember my 13th birthday, the first without Mom. I waited all day for Dad to mention it. He came home late, ate the dinner I'd prepared, and went straight to his study. Around 9 that night, he emerged with a hastily wrapped package. A scientific calculator. "You'll need this for algebra next year," he said before returning to his paperwork. No cake, no card, no happy birthday. I spent that night crying silently into my pillow, clutching the calculator like it was some kind of proof that he at least remembered I existed. School became my refuge and my battlefield. I pushed myself relentlessly, bringing home straight A's, joining every academic club, winning science fairs and debate tournaments. Each achievement was a gift I laid at his feet, hoping for just a nod of approval. "That's what's expected," he'd say. Or sometimes just good. Never "I'm proud of you" or "well done." The rare times he attended my events, he'd sit stone-faced, then critique my performance on the drive home. When I was 16, I won a statewide essay contest. The prize included publication in a prestigious journal and a $1,000 scholarship. I placed the certificate on the refrigerator right at eye level. Dad glanced at it over dinner and said, "Your conclusion was weak. You could have done better." I removed the certificate that night and never displayed another achievement in our home. College was my escape. I chose Northwestern University, close enough to visit, but far enough to breathe. Those years in Chicago showed me what it felt like to be praised, to have professors who said excellent work and friends who celebrated my successes. I called home every Sunday, beautiful conversations that lasted exactly 15 minutes before Dad would find a reason to hang up. After graduation, I stayed in Chicago, landing an entry-level position at a marketing firm. I worked my way up quickly, channeling all that childhood need for validation into professional ambition. Every promotion, every raise was a silent rebuttal to Dad's indifference. "See, I'm worth something. I matter." As the years passed, our relationship settled into a distant rhythm. Holiday visits, occasional phone calls, and a growing chasm of unspoken words between us. I dated occasionally, but never let anyone get too close. How could I explain that I didn't know how to accept love because I'd never been sure I deserved it? By the time I reached my 30s, I was the youngest marketing director in my company's history. I had a sleek downtown apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, a circle of good friends, and enough disposable income to indulge in nice things. From the outside, I had it all. Inside, I was still that 13-year-old girl desperately waiting for her father to notice her birthday. Dad never remarried, never even dated. As far as I knew, he remained at the same company in the same house with the same rigid routines. As his retirement approached, I harbored a secret hope that perhaps with more time on his hands, we might find a way to bridge the gap between us. Perhaps without the pressures of work, he might finally have space in his life for a real relationship with his only child. Last Thanksgiving, during my annual visit home, I noticed something that gave me pause. Dad had always been meticulous about maintaining his aging Ford truck, but that day I caught him looking at it with frustration. The truck was nearly 15 years old and repair bills were mounting. "Just not worth fixing anymore," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Later that evening, I overheard him on the phone with his friend Tom talking about the new Ford Phone 150 seconds. There was an unusual animation in his voice, a hint of boyish excitement I hadn't heard in decades. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I formulated a plan. Dad's 60th birthday was coming up in 6 months. What if I bought him that truck he clearly wanted but would never splurge on for himself? Not just any truck, but the exact model he'd been admiring. It would be the grandest gesture I could make. A tangible expression of all the love and yearning I'd never been able to put into words. Maybe, just maybe, it would finally crack the ice between us. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a flutter of hope. This time would be different. This time he'd have to see how much I cared. The seed of the idea took root quickly. Back in Chicago, I spent evenings researching Ford F-150 models, options and prices. I created spreadsheets comparing features, read countless reviews, and even joined truck enthusiast forums to learn the lingo. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it perfectly. Dad had always demanded perfection. After all, I discovered the Lariat model would be ideal, luxurious, without being flashy, powerful, without being excessive, something practical that would still feel special. The price tag made me was nearly $50,000 for the configuration I wanted. It would drain most of my savings and require cutting back significantly on expenses for the next year, but I convinced myself it would be worth it. To save enough money, I took on additional projects at work, volunteering for the campaigns no one else wanted. I worked weekends and late nights, building up my bonus potential. I cut back on everything non-essential. No more weekend brunches with friends, no new clothes, no vacation. That year, every dollar saved went into what I'd begun calling the truck fund in my budget app. 4 months before Dad's birthday, I contacted a Ford dealership in Detroit. The salesman, Rick, listened patiently as I explained my plan. It's for my father's 60th, I told him. He's wanted one for years, but would never buy it for himself. Something in my voice must have conveyed the deeper significance because Rick's professional demeanor softened. We'll make sure it's perfect, he promised. What color are you thinking? That required more research. I called Dad's best friend, Tom, under the guise of planning a surprise party. What color does Dad always point out when he sees the new phone 150 seconds? I asked casually. Oh, that's easy, Tom replied. He's always commenting on that deep blue they make now. Navy something. Blue Jeans Metallic it was called. I added it to the order along with the premium interior package, the larger touchscreen navigation system, and the towing package I knew he'd appreciate. Rick helped me navigate financing options, and I signed what felt like a mountain of paperwork. With each signature, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. This was the largest purchase of my life by far. I arranged for the truck to be ready the week before Dad's birthday, giving me time for any last-minute adjustments. Rick suggested having a large red bow made for it, and I agreed immediately. In my imagination, I could see Dad's face when he first laid eyes on the truck. That rare smile breaking through his usual stern expression. I pictured him actually hugging me, perhaps for the first time since Mom died. The financial sacrifice weighed on me at times. There were nights I woke up in a cold sweat wondering if I'd overextended myself. My emergency fund was nearly depleted and I'd have to rebuild it slowly. But then I'd remember that look on Dad's face when he talked about the new trucks, and determination would override my doubts. This wasn't just about a vehicle. It was about breaking through 23 years of emotional distance. As the weeks passed, my anticipation grew. I booked my flight to Detroit and arranged time off work. I called Dad's sister Sarah, letting her in on the surprise and asking her to help organize a birthday dinner at Vincenzo's, Dad's favorite Italian restaurant. My goodness, Sherry, she gasped when I told her about the truck. That's incredibly generous. It's important, I said, simply not knowing how to express that this gift represented every birthday card I'd never received, every school event he'd attended with a frown, every achievement met with lukewarm acknowledgement. The truck was my last grandest attempt to buy what had never been freely given: my father's approval, his pride, his love. The final payment cleared a week before I was set to fly to Detroit. Rick called to confirm that the truck had arrived and was being detailed to perfection. It's a beauty, he assured me. Your dad's going to be speechless. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my expectations. What if this gesture finally thawed the ice? What if this was the beginning of a new relationship with my father? One where we could actually talk, share, connect. The possibility made my heart race. But a smaller, quieter voice whispered doubts. What if the truck wasn't enough? What if nothing would ever be enough? I pushed those thoughts away, unwilling to consider that this grand gesture might fail like all my smaller ones before it. 2 days before my flight, I received photos of the truck from Rick. It was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Gleaming blue under the dealership lights, the massive red bow adding a festive touch. I felt a surge of certainty this time would be different. This time I'd finally get through to my father. My flight landed in Detroit at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the day before Dad's birthday. The familiar Midwestern humidity wrapped around me as I exited the terminal, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned coolness of the airport. I'd packed light, just one carry-on suitcase, wanting to keep things simple. Dad didn't know I was coming. As far as he knew, I'd be calling tomorrow to wish him happy birthday. The surprise visit was part of the plan. I picked up my rental car, a nondescript sedan, and headed straight for the Ford dealership. Rick greeted me with a warm handshake and led me to a private viewing area where the truck waited. Seeing it in person took my breath away. The blue jeans metallic paint had a depth and richness that photos couldn't capture. The truck was massive, powerful, and undeniably impressive. "We've kept it inside to protect the finish," Rick explained. "And we've got the giant bow all ready to go." He handed me an envelope containing all the paperwork, warranty information, owner's manual, and the title ready to be transferred to Dad's name. "There's a temporary registration good for 30 days. After that, he'll need to register it himself." I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cool, smooth metal. "It's perfect," I whispered. My chest tightened with emotion. This was really happening. 23 years of trying to earn my father's approval had culminated in this moment, this grand gesture that would surely finally break through his wall of indifference. Rick walked me through the features, showing me how to adjust the seats, navigate the entertainment system, and operate the tailgate assist. "We filled the tank, and it's ready to go whenever you are," he said. "Do you want to practice driving it before you take it? It's a lot bigger than what you might be used to." I nodded gratefully, and we spent the next hour with Rick patiently teaching me how to maneuver the massive vehicle. By the time we finished, I felt reasonably confident I could drive it without incident. We arranged for me to pick it up tomorrow afternoon, a few hours before the birthday dinner. The plan was taking shape perfectly. Next stop was Vincenzo's, where I met with Marco, the owner, who remembered my family from years of special occasions. "The last time I saw you was your college graduation dinner," he recalled with a warm smile. "Your father still comes in every few months. Always orders the same thing. The Ve Parmesan with extra sauce on the side," I said, smiling at this small connection to my father's life. Marco nodded, and a glass of the house Chianti never changes. I arranged for a private room at the back of the restaurant, large enough for the 12 people expected to attend. Uncle Bob, Dad's older brother, was coming with his wife, Elaine. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Dave would be there, too, along with a few of Dad's closest friends and colleagues. Marco helped me plan a special menu featuring all of Dad's favorites. And after the main course, I explained I'll make an excuse to go outside, and then I'll text Uncle Bob to bring Dad out to the parking lot where the truck will be waiting with the bow. Marco clasped his hands together, clearly charmed by the plan. How wonderful, he will be so surprised. If only he knew how surprised I was, hoping Dad would be surprised enough to smile, to show emotion, maybe even to hug me. The fantasy of it played in my mind constantly now, almost like a movie reel. I couldn't stop watching. I checked into my hotel room by 4 o'clock and immediately called Aunt Sarah to confirm details. "Everything's set," she assured me. "Bob and Elaine are flying in tonight. Dave and I are picking them up. Tom and Linda are coming, and so are George and Betty from the plant." "Has Dad mentioned anything about tomorrow?" I asked. "Not really. You know your father? He doesn't make a fuss about birthdays, but he knows we're all going to dinner. He thinks it's just a small family thing." I hesitated before asking the next question. "How has he been lately?" "Since retirement started." Sarah's pause told me everything before she even spoke. "About the same, dear, keeping to himself, mostly takes fishing trips with Tom. Sometimes he's thinking of doing some consulting work just to stay busy. Still the same, then still closed off, still unable to enjoy the freedom retirement should bring, still needing to stay busy rather than face whatever emotions might surface in quiet moments after hanging up. I lay on the hotel bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would change everything. I told myself firmly tomorrow the ice would finally break. I spent that evening at the hotel rehearsing what I would say when I presented the gift. Should I make a speech? Keep it simple. I practiced different versions in the mirror, watching my expressions, trying to prepare for every possible reaction from Dad. I even practiced how I would handle it if he seemed underwhelmed. "It's just something I thought you might enjoy," I would say casually, as if the truck hadn't cost me most of my savings. As if it weren't a physical manifestation of my lifelong quest for his approval. The next morning, I woke early and immediately felt butterflies in my stomach. Today was the day. I kept myself busy getting a manicure and having my hair styled at the hotel salon. I brought a new dress for the occasion, A deep blue one that happened to match the truck. Another small detail I'd planned meticulously. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned to the dealership. Rick had the truck parked by the front entrance, the enormous red bow secured to the hood. "She's all yours," he said, handing me the keys. "Or rather, soon to be your dad's. Good luck tonight." Driving the truck to the restaurant required all my concentration. I arrived early at 5:30 and parked it in a special spot Marco had reserved, partially hidden from the main entrance, but perfectly positioned for the big reveal. I took several deep breaths before heading inside to make sure everything else was ready. The private room looked beautiful. White tablecloths, elegant place settings, and subtle decorations acknowledged the milestone birthday without making it too fussy, which Dad would hate. I placed the wrapped box containing the truck's key fob on the gift table alongside smaller presents from other guests. Inside the box was also a card I'd spent hours writing, trying to find the right words to express 60 years of complicated love. By 6, guests began arriving. Uncle Bob embraced me warmly. "You look more like your mother every time I see you," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Aunt Sarah fussed over how thin I looked, insisting I must work too hard in the big city. At 6:30, I got the text I'd been waiting for. Dad had arrived. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stepped into the main dining room to greet him and froze. Dad wasn't alone. A woman I'd never seen before was with him. Her arm linked with his, her face bright with a smile. She was maybe 50, attractive in a careful way with highlighted blonde hair and an expensive-looking dress. Dad saw me and stopped. For a moment, genuine surprise crossed his face. "Sherry, didn't know you were coming." I found my voice. "Surprise." I managed, moving forward to give him our usual awkward half-hug. Then I turned to the woman, raising my eyebrows in silent question. "This is Nancy," Dad said without offering any further explanation. "Nancy, my daughter, Sherry." Nancy extended her hand, her smile never faltering. "So nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you." This was news to me. Dad had never mentioned dating anyone, let alone someone serious enough to bring to a family birthday dinner. I pushed down my unease and led them to the private room where everyone else was waiting. The next hour passed in a blur of greetings, drinks, and appetizers. I watched Dad and Nancy from across the room, noting how comfortable they seemed together, how she touched his arm when she laughed, how he actually smiled at her jokes. It was a side of my father I'd rarely seen. Certainly not directed at me. Dinner was served, and conversation flowed around the table. I said little, still processing NY's unexpected presence and what it might mean for my carefully orchestrated surprise. Would the truck still have the impact I'd hoped for with her there? Would Dad be embarrassed by such an extravagant gift in front of a woman he was clearly trying to impress? Too late to change plans now? As the main courses were cleared, I excused myself, saying I needed to make a quick call. Instead, I hurried out to the parking lot, texted Rick to let him know the reveal was about to happen, and positioned myself next to the truck. My hands were trembling as I sent the next text to Uncle Bob. "Ready?" 5 minutes later, the restaurant door opened and Uncle Bob led Dad outside, followed by the rest of the party. Dad looked confused until his eyes landed on the truck and then on me standing beside it. Time seemed to slow down. I watched his face, hungry for his reaction. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parted, but the smile I'd been waiting for didn't come. Instead, he looked blank, unreadable. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "It's yours. The exact model you've been talking about." He approached slowly, walking around the truck, studying it from every angle. The others hung back, watching, a few of them, exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. "You bought this?" he finally asked. "For me?" I nodded, holding out the small wrapped box containing the key fob. "All paid for, all yours." He took the box but didn't open it. For a long, excruciating moment, he just stood there looking at the truck, then at the box in his hands, then at me. I couldn't read his expression at all. "We should get back inside," he said finally. "Food's getting cold." My heart sank as he turned and walked back toward the restaurant, the unopened gift still in his hand. The others followed, murmuring among themselves. Nancy gave me a sympathetic look as she passed. Uncle Bob patted my shoulder. "Give him time to process," he whispered. "It's a lot to take in." I stood alone in the parking lot, the beautiful truck suddenly looking forlorn with its giant bow. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment at all. Where was the joy, the surprise, the emotional breakthrough I'd been counting on? I returned to the dining room just as dessert was being served. A birthday cake brought out with candles blazing. Everyone sang happy birthday and Dad blew out the candles with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. The gift box sat unopened beside his plate. As Marco began serving cake, Dad suddenly stood up, champagne glass in hand. The table fell silent. This was unusual. Dad never made speeches. My heart lifted. Maybe now in his own way he would acknowledge the gift, express his gratitude, perhaps even his love. He cleared his throat. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began formally. His eyes scanned the table briefly, meeting mine before moving on. 60 years. Hard to believe. There was a murmur of agreement around the table. Dad raised his glass higher. "I'd like to make a toast," he continued. My pulse quickened. Here it comes, I thought. The moment I've been waiting for all these years. Dad's gaze locked with mine, his expression unreadable. "To my idiot daughter," he said clearly, "trying to buy love with money." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a second, I thought I'd misheard, but then Uncle Bob laughed loudly, and Nancy gave a small giggle. Aunt Sarah looked down at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. Tom and Linda exchanged uncomfortable glances. The room swam before my eyes. Idiot daughter trying to buy love with money. My father had just humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered to him, had dismissed my grandest gesture as nothing but a pathetic attempt to purchase affection. And he wasn't entirely wrong. That was the worst part. I felt hot tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I stood up, placed my napkin beside my plate, and smiled. A real smile, wide and unwavering. I said nothing. No angry retort, no hurt accusation, no pleading explanation. I simply turned and walked out of the room, out of the restaurant, and into the cool evening air where finally, mercifully, I could let the tears come. The night air hit my face, cooling the burning humiliation that flushed my cheeks. I walked quickly through the parking lot past the truck with its absurdly large bow, a monument to my foolishness. I needed to get away, needed space to breathe, to think, to process the public rejection I just endured. My rental car was parked at the far end of the lot. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I gripped the steering wheel, tightly closed my eyes, and finally allowed myself to feel the full force of what had just happened. Idiot daughter trying to buy love with money. The words echoed in my head, each repetition like a slap, and the laughter that followed. Uncle Bob's hearty gauzy's delicate titter, the uncomfortable shifting of the others. They'd all witnessed my humiliation, my desperate attempt to earn my father's approval, laid bare and mocked. I started the car, but didn't drive immediately. Through the windshield, I could see the restaurant's warm lights, could picture everyone inside, still eating cake, perhaps now discussing what had just transpired. Was Dad explaining to Nancy why his daughter was so pathetic? Was Uncle Bob agreeing that I'd always been too sensitive? Was Aunt Sarah trying to defend me? Or was she too embarrassed by association? My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Sarah. "Are you okay? Where did you go?" I didn't respond. I couldn't form words yet. Couldn't explain even to the kindest member of my family what I was feeling. The hollowness in my chest was expanding, threatening to consume me entirely. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I pulled myself together enough to drive. I headed not to my hotel, but in the opposite direction toward the lake. There was a small park where Mom used to take me as a child before she got sick. A place where I'd felt safe, loved, valued. The park was deserted at this hour. I parked and walked to a bench overlooking the water. The moon cast a silver path across the dark lake. And for a moment, I was 7 years old again, holding Mom's hand, listening to her point out constellations. "You're my bright star, Sherry," she would say. "Never forget how special you are." But I had forgotten. Somewhere along the way, after losing her, I'd started to believe I needed to earn love, to prove my worth through achievements, through gifts, through constant striving for perfection. I'd internalized Dad's coldness as evidence of my own inadequacy. As I sat there, memories flooded back. A lifetime of seeking approval that was never forthcoming. The science fair project I'd worked on for weeks, Dad had attended, but spent the entire time checking his watch. The college acceptance letters I'd proudly displayed. He'd questioned whether Northwestern was worth the tuition. My first promotion. He'd wondered aloud if they were just filling a diversity quota. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from an unknown number. "This is Nancy. Your father is concerned. Please let someone know you're safe." Concerned? That was rich. Dad wasn't concerned. He was probably embarrassed that I'd made a scene by leaving. Or annoyed that my departure had disrupted his birthday dinner. Or both. I typed back quickly. "I'm fine, enjoying some quiet time. Please continue the celebration without me." I added a smiley face emoji, A small passive-aggressive touch that felt childish even as I sent it. Almost immediately, my phone rang. Aunt Sarah. I hesitated, then answered. Sherry, where are you, honey? Her voice was so kind that tears welled up again. I just needed some air. I managed. I'm at Lakeview Park. Oh, sweetheart, she sighed heavily. I'm so sorry about what happened. Your dad, he doesn't always think before he speaks. This was the understatement of the century. He knew exactly what he was saying, I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. And he meant it. It's complicated, Sherry. The truck. It's a very extravagant gift. I think it overwhelmed him. So that justifies humiliating me in front of everyone. The anger was rising now, pushing through the hurt. He called me an idiot, Aunt Sarah. He mocked me for trying to do. I couldn't finish the sentence because he was right, wasn't he? I had been trying to buy his love, his approval, his pride, $50,000 worth of desperation. After you left, things got very uncomfortable, Sarah continued. Bob tried to laugh it off as a joke, but everyone could tell it wasn't. Nancy looked mortified. Your dad just sat there staring at his cake. I don't care, I said. But of course I did. I cared desperately, and that was the whole problem. The dinner broke up early. Everyone's gone home. Dad took the truck keys, but left the bow on. I think he didn't know how to react, Sherry. A gift that size, it put him on the spot. I laughed bitterly. The great Richard Wallace, speechless, that's a first. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Where are you staying? Do you want to come to our place tonight? Dave and I have the guest room all made up. The offer was tempting. I didn't want to be alone. Didn't want to sit in a sterile hotel rooming the evening's events until dawn. But I also needed space to think to decide what to do next. Thanks, but I'll be okay at the hotel. I just need some time. I understand, but call if you change your mind, no matter how late, we're here for you. After hanging up, I sat for a while longer, watching the moonlight on the water. The hurt was still there, a deep ache in my chest, but the initial shock was wearing off. In its place was a clarity I hadn't expected. A sudden sharp understanding of the patterns that had defined my relationship with my father for 23 years. I had been chasing his approval like a dog after a car, never questioning what I'd do if I caught it. And for what? So I could finally feel worthy. So I could fill the hole Mom's death had left. So I could silence the voice in my head that constantly whispered, I wasn't good enough. It was nearly midnight when I finally returned to my hotel. In the quiet of my room, I made a decision that had been 23 years in the making. I was done chasing, done trying to earn love that should have been freely given, done measuring my worth by my father's impossible standards. I picked up my phone and composed an email to Rick at the dealership. There's been a change of plans, I wrote. I need to take the truck back. Can we meet early tomorrow morning? His response came quickly despite the late hour. Of course. Is everything okay? No, everything was not okay. But maybe, just maybe, it would be. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., then lay down fully clothed on top of the hotel bed. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won out. My dreams were a confused jumble of trucks with giant bows, birthday cakes with unlit candles, and my father's voice repeating those cutting words over and over. Idiot daughter trying to buy love with money. The alarm jolted me awake at 5. For a brief merciful moment, I didn't remember the events of the previous night. Then it all came rushing back. The truck, the toast, the humiliation. I sat up rubbing my face. I'd slept in my clothes, and my eyes felt swollen from crying. But beneath the lingering hurt was a steely determination that had crystallized during the night. I showered quickly and changed into jeans and a t-shirt. No more dressing to impress. No more trying so hard. This morning I was just Sherry. Not Richard Wallace's achievement-oriented daughter. Not the successful marketing director. Just me. By 5:30, I was in my rental car, navigating the quiet suburban streets in the pale pre-dawn light. I knew where I was going. The house I'd grown up in, the house where Dad still lived. I still had a key, though I rarely used it during my infrequent visits, preferring to ring the doorbell like the guest I'd become in my childhood home. Dad's neighborhood was silent at this hour, most houses still dark. As I turned onto his street, my headlights swept across a familiar blue shape in his driveway, the truck. So, he'd driven it home after all. The giant bow was gone, probably removed before he'd driven it from the restaurant. At least he hadn't left it sitting in Vincenzo's parking lot. I parked a few houses down and turned off my engine, sitting in the darkness for a moment to collect my thoughts. What I was about to do was dramatic, perhaps even petty, but it also felt necessary, a line in the sand I needed to draw for my own self-respect. The spare key to Dad's house was where it had always been hidden, beneath a false rock in the garden. Inside the house was quiet and dark, smelling faintly of coffee, and the same pin-scented cleaner he'd used for decades. I moved silently through the familiar spaces, avoiding the creaky floorboard in the hallway, navigating by memory more than by the dim light filtering through the curtains. On the kitchen counter, I spotted the small gift box I'd given Dad at the restaurant. Now open, the key fob removed. Beside it lay the truck's paperwork, warranty information, manual, title transfer forms. He hadn't signed anything yet. Good. That would make this easier. I took the key fob and the paperwork, then paused. Should I leave a note? What would I even say? No words seemed adequate to express the complexity of what I was feeling. In the end, I decided silence was more powerful. He'd know exactly why the truck was gone. Back outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. I approached the truck, half expecting to feel regret or uncertainty, but instead, I felt only a calm resolve. This vehicle represented everything unhealthy about our relationship. My desperate need to please, his inability to accept or appreciate my efforts. Taking it back wasn't just about the hurt of last night. It was about breaking a dysfunctional pattern that had defined most of my life. The truck started with a quiet rumble that sounded deafening in the silent morning. I backed carefully out of the driveway, then drove slowly down the street past my rental car and out of the neighborhood. In the rear-view mirror, I watched Dad's house recede and felt a weight lifting from my shoulders with each passing block. Rick was already at the dealership when I arrived, despite the early hour. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. Didn't go as planned, he asked gently. I managed a small rueful smile. You could say that. He didn't press for details and I was grateful. We went to his office where I explained that I wanted to return the truck. I know there's a restocking fee, depreciation costs. I understand I won't get the full amount back. That's okay. Rick looked uncomfortable. Let me talk to my manager. Since it's only been one day, maybe we can work something out. While he was gone, I sat in his office staring at the framed photos on his desk. Rick with his family, all smiles at what looked like a graduation ceremony. A normal family celebrating together. The kind of family I'd always wanted but never had. When Rick returned, he had good news. We can take it back as a dealer return. There will be a processing fee of $2,000, but the rest will be refunded to your account. It was more than I'd expected. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion that had nothing to do with the money. We spent the next hour processing paperwork, transferring the title back, documenting the truck's condition. Through it all, my phone remained silent in my pocket. Dad must not have discovered the truck's absence yet. By 8:30, everything was finalized. I stood in the dealership parking lot, waiting for the Uber that would take me back to my rental car. The morning was fully bright now, the June sun warming the air. I felt oddly light, as though I'd put down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. The Uber had just arrived when my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Where is the truck? Simple, direct, no emotion. Typical. I didn't respond. Just got into the Uber and directed the driver to the address where I'd left my rental car. During the 20-minute ride, my phone buzzed several more times. I ignored it. Back at my rental car, I finally checked my messages. 5 texts from Dad, each increasingly urgent. Where is the truck? Did you take it? Answer your phone. This isn't funny, Sherry. I'm calling the police if I don't hear from you in 10 minutes. The last one made me laugh out loud. A sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. The police? What would he report? That his daughter had taken back the gift he'd mocked her for giving. I typed a brief response. The truck has been returned to the dealership. Your name was never on the title. No crime has been committed. His reply came instantly. Why would you do that? The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I had to pull over to respond. My fingers flew across the screen. You called me an idiot for giving it to you. You said I was trying to buy love with money in front of everyone who matters to you. What did you expect me to do? No response. I waited 5 minutes, then continued driving to my hotel. I needed to pack, change my flight, get back to Chicago, back to my real life where at least my accomplishments were valued, even if only professionally. In the hotel parking lot, my phone rang. Dad, I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately and again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. What? His voice was tight, controlled. You had no right to take that truck. Of all the things he could have said, this was perhaps the most infuriating. I had every right. It was mine. I paid for it. I never completed the title transfer. It was a gift, he insisted. You can't just take back a gift because your feelings got hurt. My feelings got hurt. I repeated, my voice rising. You publicly humiliated me. You called me an idiot in front of your friends, your family, your new girlfriend. For trying to do something nice for you. It wasn't something nice. It was excessive, inappropriate. No one spends that kind of money on a birthday gift. What were you thinking? What had I been thinking? That this grand gesture would finally break through his emotional wall. That for once in my life, he'd look at me with pride, with gratitude, with love. I was thinking you might appreciate it, I said, my voice suddenly tired. I was wrong. Lesson learned. This is childish, Sherry. Returning the truck because of one comment. It wasn't just a comment, Dad. It was a public declaration of how little you think of me. How little you've always thought of me. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had that lecturing tone I knew so well. You've always been too sensitive. Your mother coddled you, and after she died, I tried to toughen you up. The world isn't kind, Sherry. I was preparing you for that. The old justification, the one he'd used throughout my childhood whenever his coldness had made me cry. I was too sensitive. The world was harsh. He was doing me a favor by withholding affection, approval, warmth. I'm 35 years old, Dad. I've managed to survive in the unkind world just fine. I'm successful, independent, strong. No, thanks to you. No, thanks to me. Now, he sounded angry. Who paid for your education, who gave you a stable home, who taught you the value of hard work? You provided the basics. I acknowledged, food, shelter, tuition. But you never gave me what I actually needed. A father who was proud of me, who showed me he loved me, who made me feel like I mattered. Silence again. I could almost see him. Jaw-clenched eyes narrowed the way he always looked when emotions threatened to break through his carefully maintained control. I have to go, I said finally. My flight leaves in 3 hours. You're leaving? Just like that. Yes, just like that. Happy birthday, Dad. I hung up before he could respond, turned off my phone, and went inside to pack. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, I realized my hands were shaking. Not with fear or hurt, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I'd confronted my father about his emotional neglect. I'd stood up for myself, rejected the narrative that I was too sensitive, and walked away from the dysfunctional dynamic we'd maintained for decades. It didn't feel good exactly, but it felt right, necessary, long overdue. I checked out of the hotel, returned the rental car, and headed to the airport. Throughout it all, I kept my phone off. Whatever Dad or the rest of the family had to say could wait until I was back in Chicago in my own space with some emotional distance from the whole situation. On the plane, looking out at the clouds below, I realized something important. The truck had cost me nearly $50,000, and I'd lost $2,000 in the return process. But what I'd gained was priceless. The beginning of freedom from a lifetime of seeking validation from someone who couldn't or wouldn't give it. It had been an expensive lesson, but perhaps worth every penny. The moment my plane touched down in Chicago, I turned on my phone. It immediately began buzzing with notifications. 30 missed calls, dozens of text messages, even a few emails. It seemed the entire Wallace family had opinions about what had transpired. Dad had called 15 times. Uncle Bob 7, and Sarah 5. There were even calls from Dad's friends Tom and George, and one from Nancy, which surprised me. I scrolled through the text messages, getting progressively angrier with each one. From Dad, this is ridiculous. Call me immediately. From Uncle Bob, you're overreacting. Your father was just making a joke. From Tom, your dad's really upset. The truck meant a lot to him. From George, Dick is beside himself. Never seen him so worked up. From Nancy, I'm so sorry about what happened. Please call your father. Only Aunt Sarah's messages showed any understanding of my perspective. I understand why you're hurt, Sherry. What he said was cruel, but maybe talk to him when you've both cooled down. I shoved the phone back in my pocket without responding to anyone. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them feel a fraction of the anxiety I'd felt my entire life, trying to anticipate my father's reactions, trying to earn his approval. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I finally walked through the door. I dropped my suitcase, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the couch, emotionally drained. Through the large windows, I could see Lake Michigan in the distance, its surface glittering in the afternoon sunday. Chicago had been my escape, my fresh start, my proof that I could thrive without my father's validation. The city had never felt more like home than it did in that moment. The phone started ringing again. Dad. I silenced it and closed my eyes, breathing deeply. What I needed now was perspective, not another confrontation. I needed to process what had happened and decide where to go from here. After a shower and change of clothes, I felt more myself. I made a cup of tea and sat on my balcony watching the city below. The distance, physical and emotional, from Detroit, and all it represented felt crucial to my well-being right now. My phone buzzed with a text from a Chicago number. I didn't recognize Sherry. "It's Nancy. Please don't block me. I got your number from your father's phone. I think we should talk." This was unexpected. I barely knew the woman, had met her only yesterday. What could she possibly have to say that would matter to me? Still, curiosity won out. "What about?" I texted back. Her response came quickly. "About your father. There's more to the story than you know." I hesitated. Was this a manipulation tactic? A way to get me to call Dad, or did Nancy genuinely have insight that might help me make sense of the situation? "I'm listening," I replied. "Not over text. Can I call you?" I gave her 10 minutes to call, using the time to steel myself. When the phone rang, I answered with a neutral hello. "Sherry, thank you for taking my call." NY's voice was warm but tentative. "I know I'm the last person you probably want to hear from right now." "You're not the last," I said, honestly. "That would be my father." She gave a small sad laugh. "Fair enough. Look, I want to apologize for last night. I should never have laughed at what your father said. It was cruel and I was just caught off guard. It was a nervous reaction, not because I found it funny. This wasn't what I'd expected." "Okay," I said, not sure how else to respond. "I've only been dating your father for 4 months, Nancy continued. He never mentioned having a daughter until a few weeks ago when he finally told me about you. It was all at once. How successful you are, how independent, how you'd made your own way without needing his help. This was news to me. Dad bragging about me. It seemed impossible. He showed me articles your company had published with your name in the byline. He had them saved on his computer. He told me about your Northwestern degree, your rapid promotions. He was proud, Sherry." In his own way, my throat tightened. "He's never told me any of that." "I know," Nancy sighed. "That's what I'm trying to explain. Your father doesn't know how to express emotions directly. The truck, it overwhelmed him. The gesture was so grand, so public. He didn't know how to react. So, he called me an idiot." My voice was sharp. "That's how he handles being overwhelmed." "No, that was." She paused. "That was him being defensive. When he feels vulnerable, he attacks. It's a pattern I've noticed even in our short relationship. When something touches him deeply, he pushes it away." I thought about this. It matched my lifetime of experiences with Dad. The more something mattered to him, the more detached he became. Still, it didn't excuse what he'd done. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he's miserable. Sherry, he's been calling you nonstop. He even called the police to try to track your phone until I convinced him that was crossing a line." Despite everything, this made me smile. Typical Dad going to extremes rather than simply saying, "I'm sorry." When he saw the truck was gone this morning, he completely fell apart. Nancy continued, not angry like I expected, but devastated. "He sat in the driveway for an hour just staring at the empty space. The image was hard to reconcile with the stoic, emotionally distant man I knew." "What do you want from me, Nancy?" "Nothing you don't want to give. I just thought you should know there's more to your father than what you saw last night. The mask he wears, it's not the whole person." After we hung up, I sat with her words, turning them over in my mind. Could it be true? Was Dad actually proud of me but unable to show it? Had the truck genuinely overwhelmed him rather than disappointed him? It was a perspective I hadn't considered, one that cast our entire relationship in a different light. But even if Nancy was right, even if Dad did secretly admire my accomplishments, it didn't erase decades of emotional neglect, it didn't justify the public humiliation at the birthday dinner. Understanding the root of his behavior was one thing. Excusing it was another. My phone rang again. "Dad." This time I answered. "Sherry." His voice was rough as though he'd been awake all night. "Where are you?" "I'm home in Chicago. You left without saying goodbye." The absurdity of this complaint after what had happened made me laugh bitterly. "Did you expect a hug and a wave after you called me an idiot in front of everyone?" He was quiet for a moment. "I shouldn't have said that." Coming from Dad, this was practically a groveling apology. "No, you shouldn't have." "The truck," he began, then stopped. "It was too much, Sherry. Too expensive, too extravagant. That was for me to decide. It was my money. Money you should be saving, investing, not wasting on an old man who doesn't need a luxury truck." This was so typically Dad, turning a personal interaction into a financial lecture. "It wasn't about need, Dad. It was about doing something special for your 60th birthday. About trying to make you happy." Another silence. Then I don't deserve that kind of gift. The words were so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. In all our years, I'd never heard my father suggest he was undeserving of anything. His confidence, his certainty in his own rightness had been constants in my life. What do you mean? I asked. I haven't been. He struggled, clearly uncomfortable. I know I'm not good at showing certain things. Emotions, I supplied. Affection, pride in your only child. Yes. The words seemed to cost him greatly. Your mother was better at that. After she died, I didn't know how to. I thought being strict would make you stronger. It didn't make me stronger, Dad. It made me insecure. It made me spend my whole life trying to prove I was worth loving. He made a sound like I'd struck him. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't matter as much as impact, I said, echoing something my therapist had told me years ago. And the impact was that I never felt good enough. I still don't. You are. He said, the words coming out in a rush. Good enough. More than good enough. You're exceptional, Sherry. Always have been. I don't know how to say these things. I closed my eyes, absorbing the words I'd waited decades to hear. They sounded genuine, but they also came only after I'd taken dramatic action. Only after I'd pushed back against his cruelty. Where had this acknowledgement been when I was growing up? When I was graduating? When I was struggling to establish my career? It's a little late, Dad. I know. His voice was heavy with regret. Nancy says I need therapy. This startled a laugh out of me. Nancy's right. Would it help if I talked to someone, learned to communicate better? Would that matter to you? The question caught me off guard. Dad had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to listen to your problems. This openness to change was new territory. It might, I said cautiously. But I need time, Dad. Last night was really hurtful. I understand. He didn't sound defensive now, just tired and sad. Take the time you need. I'll be here. After we hung up, I felt emotionally wrung out, but strangely peaceful. Something had shifted in our relationship. Perhaps something fundamental. I didn't know if it could be fully repaired, but for the first time, I felt like Dad was actually seeing me, hearing me, recognizing the impact of his behavior. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sleep, mindless TV, and takeout food. I'd called in sick to work, needing the mental health day to process everything. By evening, I'd come to a decision. I would give Dad a chance to show he meant what he'd said. But I would also maintain firm boundaries. No more desperate attempts to win his approval. No more measuring my worth by his reactions. If our relationship was going to heal, it would have to be on new terms. Terms that included mutual respect and emotional honesty. I texted him before going to bed. I'm willing to work on our relationship, but I need you to understand how deeply your words and actions have hurt me over the years. This isn't just about last night. It's about a lifetime of feeling not good enough. His response came quickly. I understand. I want to do better. I don't want to lose you. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. 1 year later, I stood in my Chicago apartment packing a small overnight bag for a weekend trip to Detroit. So much had changed in 12 months, both in my external circumstances and more importantly within myself. After the birthday dinner disaster, Dad and I had entered a new phase in our relationship. Tentative, cautious, but more honest than we'd ever been. True to his word, he'd started seeing a therapist, something I still found somewhat miraculous. It's uncomfortable, he'd admitted during one of our now regular Sunday phone calls, having to talk about feelings. But Dr. Levine says, I've spent 60 years building walls, so it'll take time to dismantle them. I'd resumed therapy as well, working through my deep-seated need for validation and the patterns of behavior that had developed from growing up with emotional neglect. My therapist had helped me see how the truck incident, painful as it was, had been a necessary breaking point, the moment when I finally stopped accepting the unacceptable. Work had become less all-consuming as I found better balance in my life. I'd even started dating again cautiously. Jason was kind and patient, a graphic designer who understood creative pressure, but also knew how to leave work at work. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months, taking things slowly, building a foundation based on mutual respect and open communication. My phone buzzed with a text from, Dad, drive safely tomorrow. Weather looks clear, but traffic might be heavy on Friday afternoon. This was the new Dad. Still practical, still somewhat reserved, but making an effort to express care in his own way. I smiled as I texted back. I'll be careful. See you around 6. The trip to Detroit was for Dad's 61st birthday. No extravagant gifts this time, no elaborate surprises. Instead, I was bringing a photo album I'd put together filled with pictures from my childhood, many featuring Mom. It had been a labor of love, sifting through old photos, scanning them, arranging them chronologically. Some brought back painful memories, but many reminded me of good times I'd almost forgotten. Fishing trips with Dad when I was very young before Mom got sick. A science project he'd helped me with in 4th grade. High school graduation where a photo caught him looking at me with what I now recognized as pride, though his face had seemed impassive to me at the time. The drive to Detroit the next day gave me time to reflect on all that had transpired since that disastrous birthday dinner. The truck incident had cost me financially, but what I'd gained was far more valuable. A new sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to Dad's approval, a clearer understanding of our dysfunctional patterns, and surprisingly, the beginnings of a more authentic relationship with my father. Dad was waiting on the porch when I pulled up to the house, a sight that would have been unimaginable a year ago. He didn't rush to greet me, but he stood and watched as I gathered my bag from the car, a small smile visible even from a distance. "You made good time," he said as I approached his version of a warm welcome. But then he did something unexpected. He opened his arms for a hug. Brief but real. Inside the house looked different. NY's influence, I suspected. There were new curtains, throw pillows on the couch, fresh paint in the living room. But the most significant change was the collection of framed photos on the mantel. Pictures of me at various ages, of Mom, of Dad and Nancy, even one of all three of us from Christmas when I'd come home for 3 days and we'd managed a peaceful, if somewhat awkward, holiday together. The birthday dinner was at Dad's house this year, just the 3 of us, plus Aunt Sarah and Uncle Dave. Nancy had prepared Dad's favorite pot roast, and the conversation flowed more easily than I could ever remember in that dining room. Uncle Dave talked about his plans to retire next year. Aunt Sarah shared stories about her volunteer work at the animal shelter. Nancy described the book club she'd recently joined. Dad was quieter, but he was present in a way he hadn't been before, listening, actively asking questions, even laughing at Uncle Dave's corny jokes. Occasionally his eyes would meet mine across the table carrying a message. I was still learning to decode, but that seemed to say, "I'm trying. I see you. This matters." After dessert, I gave him the photo album. He opened it slowly, his expression guarded at first, but as he turned the pages, something in his face softened. He paused at a picture of Mom holding me as a baby, him standing stiffly beside her. "I was terrified," he said quietly, surprising everyone. "When you were born, scared I'd do it wrong. Your mother was a natural with you, but I never knew what to do." This vulnerability, this glimpse into his inner world was new. "You did your best," I said, meaning it for perhaps the first time. "We both did." He nodded, continuing through the album. When he reached a photo of us at the lake the summer before Mom got sick, he stopped again. "We were happy then," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All 3 of us." "Yes," I agreed. "We were." When he reached the end of the album, he closed it carefully and looked up at me. His eyes were damp, something I'd seen only a handful of times in my life. "Thank you," he said. The words weighted with meaning beyond the gift itself. "This is perfect." Later after, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Dave had gone home, and Nancy had tactfully retreated to give us some privacy. Dad and I sat on the back porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. It was a warm June evening, the air heavy with the scent of NY's roses. "I've been thinking a lot about last year," Dad said suddenly. "About the truck." I tensed slightly. We hadn't spoken directly about that night in months. "What about it?" I was wrong. Not just what I said at the dinner, but how I reacted to the gift itself. I was overwhelmed, yes, but I was also ashamed. "Ashamed of what?" He sighed, searching for words. "That you felt you needed to do something so grand to get my attention, that I'd been so withholding. That you thought you needed to buy a $50,000 truck to make me happy?" He paused. "And then I made it worse by lashing out, hurting you publicly. I've regretted it every day since." The apology, so clear and specific, washed over me like a wave. "I think we were both caught in a dysfunctional pattern," I said after a moment. "Me trying desperately to earn your approval. You unable to express your feelings directly. It was bound to explode eventually." He nodded slowly. "Dr. Levine says something similar. That relationships get stuck in patterns that feel familiar even when they're harmful." "That sounds about right." We sat in silence for a while, comfortable in a way we'd never been before. Finally, Dad spoke again. "I am proud of you, Sherry. Not because of your job or your degree or any of those external things. Just because of who you are, your kindness, your resilience, your willingness to give me another chance after everything. I should have told you that every day of your life." The words I'd waited decades to hear. They brought tears to my eyes, but not the bitter, frustrated tears of the past. These were tears of release of long-held pain finally being acknowledged and beginning to heal. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." As I flew back to Chicago on Sunday evening, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The painful birthday dinner had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough. By standing up for myself, by refusing to accept less than I deserved, I'd created space for something new and healthier to emerge. The healing wasn't complete, of course. Dad and I still had moments of miscommunication, still fell occasionally into old patterns, but we were both committed to the process, both willing to do the uncomfortable work of building a more authentic relationship. The greatest gift of the past year hadn't been material at all. It had been learning that my worth wasn't dependent on Dad's approval or anyone else's. That I could set boundaries, speak my truth, and still be loved. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a situation that's hurting you, even temporarily, to create space for genuine change. I'd spent most of my life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. The truck had been the culmination of that misguided effort, the grandest, most desperate attempt to buy what couldn't be purchased. In losing $50,000, I'd gained something priceless. The understanding that true love isn't earned through achievements or grand gestures, but given freely without conditions. The most valuable gift I'd given myself wasn't the truck I'd bought for Dad, but the moment I stood up and walked out of that restaurant with my dignity intact. The moment I decided I deserved better. The moment I stopped trying to be worthy of love and realized I had been worthy all along.